And angels came and attended to Jesus after the great temptations of the wilderness. I could listen to that anthem every Sunday of Lent, actually. Choir, thank you so much. What a beautiful, powerful words and tune. So I have a 2-point message today, and Carolyn Lewis is a fabulous preacher in Minnesota. She writes a blog each week, and she writes it to preachers. It's called Dear Preachers. And I'm going to let you listen in to her 2 points. She calls them the 2 traps of preaching on this passage of the first Sunday of Lent, of Jesus in the wilderness. So I'll give you a little bit of her thoughts, and I'm going to share a little bit of my personal thoughts. So she says, Dear preachers, the first preaching slip-up in this story of Jesus being tested is that we start acting as if Jesus isn't really human. After all, we're talking about the Son of God, which both he knows and we know. Did the Son of God really need this dance with the devil to be certain of himself and his mission? Do we? Is this detour just Jesus going through the motions, acting out a handed-down story? To imagine this incident as just pretense, however, is the first step down that slippery slope, she says. She calls it Gnosticism. It's one of the struggles theologically where some people in Gnosticism would say, Jesus didn't really feel the pain on the cross. You know, he was God after all. Gnosticism is a thinking way of, almost saying incarnation, the fact of God becoming human. Nah, we don't need that. We like this all-powerful God. So her first tip to all of us, and myself as a preacher, we're talking about a real Jesus who really did struggle as a human. Last Sunday is a blur to me. I was dealing with post-trauma. David Chesney and I have coffee twice a month. I pick him up on a Wednesday. He's usually standing down by his driveway when I arrive because he's an early bird. I'm usually late. For some reason on this morning, I pull up early and he's not there. And it's a beautiful sunny day like today. And put the car in park and I watch him walking down. And all of a sudden I look out my window and just as he's about to reach to my door, he's gone. I don't do well with trauma. I know I've probably told you this in years. Sadly, Nancy and I have come across far too many accidents I want to remember, but my wife's out the door and doing CPR way before I am. And in this moment, there was no other option. So I'm dealing last Sunday, my friends, with still not sure if David is going to live or die. And I will tell you that 30 minutes at the base of his driveway, the angels ministered unto David, and I feel myself, because a woman I'd never met before came with a paramedic bag and said, my son's a paramedic and I have a bag. She had a blanket too. And then another gentleman, a next door neighbor, never met these people before. Police showed up. My 911 call wasn't going through. They said, sorry, we don't know if this is a real deal or not. I said, well, we've got a real deal here. And 20, 30 minutes later, we were just trying to keep David comfortable. And then we end up at the incredible experience at the ER at the General. And for some strange reason, the nurses kept saying, don't say this anymore. I'd never seen the General so quiet. There was not one person in the ER at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. And I'm dealing with a dear soul that is, dealing with a fractured skull. We're not aware at that time, but bleeding. And the caring nurses and doctors were just so comforting. As his wife, I was able to rouse her and take her down to ER, Heather. And I realized the days following that going to see David each day, that I was living with the post-trauma of, could I have done this differently? What could I have done? And I remember David in ER saying, and it always reminded me, Nancy tells me the story of an anesthesiologist that would always say, I guess he'd say this sometimes before you're kind of put to sleep or something, he would just say, don't be scared, don't be scared. And I'm like thinking, I am scared. And Dave, I was trying to bring that comfort to Dave, and David kept saying, I am scared, I am scared. I said, so we prayed together. And the care at the General from ICU to step down, and now he's on the 4th floor. And the TT therapeutic touch, day by day, your prayers, Heather and David feel it incredibly. And on Friday when I saw him, he was the best I had seen him in 10 days. And he was talking, and very David Chesney, I'm gonna get through this. And so, friends, I just share with you that I've experienced more trauma than I realized. So if you thought I was a bit of a fog last Sunday, I really was, and I'm human. The second misstep Carolyn says about preaching this is sometimes we tend to think of Jesus in the wilderness as similar to the kind of temptation we face in our lives. Like, I'm going to give up alcohol, my beer for Lent, or I'm going to give up my chocolate. Here's a cute one, though. Pat said I could say this. At the 9 o'clock service, Pat said, I'm not giving anything up. Well, she isn't away. She says, I'm going to give something away. And I said, Pat, what do you mean by that? She said, for Lent, she goes, I have too much stuff at my stage of life, so I'm going to think very dearly about it, but I want to give precious items I adore, and for Lent, I'm going to give them away. I kind of wonder if that's a little setting her free. So, again, Caroline Lewis says, this is not a temptation story about some kind of divine entertainment to kind of give us something to do for the next 40 days. This is much deeper than that. The truth of the matter is, yes, Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, but Jesus is going to need every ounce of trust that Jesus can muster to be the Messiah, the Savior we need him to be. I suspect, she says, this is where many of us in ministry live and try to do life. The space between the assurance of faith and when trusting God is the hardest thing we've ever done. And us preachers are no different than everyone here, all of us. But I wonder how many of you have become quite the experts in circumventing the temptation space, where people look to you as a minister, preacher, priest, to help them in seeing confidence in God from falling away. I wonder how many of you are simply exhausted because you feel just as alone in the desert as they do, but you're trying your darndest to be strong, to assure them not to be scared, although we're all fighting against the odds. She says, you know what I mean about the gods, the deities of today. And here they are, she says. The deities of today that say, Scripture really doesn't matter that much. Throw a few stories in. The Bible's really not that relevant. She says deities like, the church is declining anyway. It won't even be around in the next 10 years. The deities like, who judge the church success by, how many numbers are in the pews on Sunday, how many programs, how much money we have, how many new innovations. We all know these are golden calves, not just of society, but of the church. And of the society, she says, it's to forget that the poor is what Jesus cared about. It's about the forgotten. It's about the most vulnerable. It's about the ones that were excluded that Jesus cared most about, who get ignored. So, dear working preachers, she says, I feel like this year's temptation story is actually talking directly to us preachers, we who are so intent on taking care of others. It's time to remember that we're all in the wilderness together. And it's time to remember that we're all being ministered by angels. And I just want to close with this. Words can't even describe the ways I've been ministered by you in different ways. And they're prayerful ways, they're words of affirmation, they're text messages, they're phone calls. They're, as David tried to tell me on Friday, don't be hard on yourself. He appreciates, of course, not just me, but everything everyone has done. And so, my friends, as you journey into this season, I hope we can all journey prayerfully. I hope we can all journey honestly, that sometimes the days are pretty dark, and they're pretty difficult. And that goes for every preacher or minister I've ever known, and that goes for each and every one of us.